Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Change is Hard, y'all. We're professionals now. We've done 2 podcast episodes. I'm excited.
It's really a gig behind that.
1, 2.
No, for 0 pay.
So I'm here with my co-host, Erin and Shay.
Hey.
And we're so lucky because we are going to have today for you our first expert. Bonnie Cleveland is a local therapist, and she's going to help us understand why some people can change and other people may find it much harder. So we're excited to have her with us today. Hey, Bonnie, glad that you're here.
Hi, Leslie, Jay, Erin. Nice to see you.
Hello.
Yeah, we're really glad you agreed to come out on this rainy day to talk with us about change. So before we get started, would you give us your background, Bonnie, and tell us?
I'm a clinical psychologist. I went to Virginia Tech for a master's and PhD, and I've been in practice almost 30 years now. And I see mostly adults with anxiety disorders. Definitely see some people with depression as well, but a large part of what I'm doing every day is helping people change.
So there you go. You're our expert. Well, like as an overview, what would you say about what is necessary for people to change? Maybe they know they need to change. Something's not working for them. Give us your thoughts about what they need or what prompts them.
Well, that's a big question. One of the things I think that I want to get across is that change is slow. And sometimes it seems like change is rapid, but that's when you're looking at someone from the outside, right? There are all these stages that happen to change. And so even small changes sometimes can take years or decades. So change is slow. We can talk about how to speed that up a little bit.
Good.
But the other thing that's really necessary for change that I think sometimes people forget is that we need motivation. So you might know how to change, and you might realize that you know how to change, but you've still got to have that motivation to change.
Right. Right.
Would you say, like, if you had to pick one key ingredient for people to be able to change, would that be it? Like, they have to have the willingness or the motivation?
Yeah, I think that's fair. People can change without expert advice, for example, if they're super motivated. But I think then what they do is they go out and find experts who can help them change. And that doesn't necessarily mean a psychologist, but it might be a self-help group, or it might be books, or it might be podcasts, but they figure out how to change. So motivation is really important. The second thing that I think is really important is what psychologists call self-efficacy. And that's the idea that you can change. So if I were really motivated to change, let's say I really, really wanted to lose weight, but I thought I can't lose weight. No matter what I do, it's not going to work. I'm probably not going to start, right? And so you need that motivation and you need self-efficacy in order to start the change process.
Have faith in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You can.
And when you're talking about motivation, the things that come to mind for me are, does that mean that something about the current moment has to be like uncomfortable or not working? Because some changes do happen that aren't a big deal. Like if you find a new flavor of yogurt at the store that you hadn't encountered before and it becomes your new favorite, well, hey, that, like, congratulations, has had a lifestyle change regarding your yogurt consumption, and it didn't hurt you at all, and it didn't require any, self-efficacy or anything. So when we're talking about these changes that require oomph, are we talking about changes where something feels not right now?
Absolutely. I think that, why would you want to change if there weren't some motivation to change? And there's a bias that we have called present bias. And this bias is that we want a reward right away. So when we talk about behavior change, we're going to talk a lot about rewards and punishments. And they're not always what people think about. It's not necessarily somebody else rewarding you or someone else punishing you. Sometimes they are rewards or punishments that are inherent to the situation. And so present bias is essentially, I may want to lose weight, but the cake that's in my kitchen tastes really good. And so we're a lot more focused on those rewards or punishments that are most, are closest to us, right? And a lot of the things that we want to change are much bigger, long-term things. And the rewards are, it's punishing early on to start an exercise program or to leave your evangelical background, right? The rewards are really long-term. So there's a sense in which you need to feel enough pain to overcome that inertia so that you can change.
You're making me think about delayed gratification. That it's hard to wait for that gratification instead of, we all like immediate gratification.
Right. And you have to have some faith that that will come, right? So I'm uncomfortable and I want to change. I know how to change. And if I change, I'm not going to be miserable all the time. So imagine if you're trying to quit smoking and what you think is, oh my gosh, I'm having this withdrawal symptoms. I feel terrible. I can't feel terrible like this the rest of my life. I'm not going to quit smoking, right? But when you change something like that, it's because you realize the punishments are greater than your rewards, and that there will in fact be a time when you're not having cravings for cigarettes every minute of every day.
You have to keep telling yourself that and recognize it. Erin told us last time about a change she made, and what strikes me is that Erin had what it took to break away from how she was raised. And I'm sure there are people out there who would like to be out of that community, but just don't have what it takes. So could you speak to that particular kind of situation?
Yeah, I worry a little bit about the language of what it takes. I think, yes, it can take a lot of strength to change, especially to make such a dramatic change when you might lose lots of people around you. You might lose your job. You might lose your family.
Right.
But also there's a certain amount of privilege that makes change easier, right? So if you have some financial flexibility, that's a little bit easier. Imagine if you were in a cult and you didn't have a birth certificate because your cult believes in home births and doesn't believe in government paperwork, and you didn't go to school past the 3rd grade, maybe never outside the school. You don't have the privilege to change without substantial help. And so I just want to acknowledge that yes, some of it is having a sort of strength of character to admit to yourself how terrible things are. But some of it is our circumstances as well.
I work with women who are experiencing domestic violence, and we hear people say all the time, why didn't you just leave? But what if you're 60 and you have 4 kids and you've never worked outside the home? She doesn't have the privilege you're talking about.
Right. Or, she doesn't have the self-efficacy. She might even have the privilege and not realize it. You can see people saying, well, I don't know how we would afford to live separately. But when things get bad enough, they will. Right? And so some of it is circumstantial, but some of it is our beliefs about our own ability to make a change. And it's scary. It's really scary, but it's easy to look at somebody else and say, well, I would change. If my husband hit me, I would leave immediately.
Right.
Right?
Much easier. Erin, do you want to speak up about what prompted you to take the risk to be so different than your family and community?
Well, like Bonnie was saying, it was very, very slow. This is, I was already kind of different from the community to begin with, so I think that worked the uncomfortable muscle of always being different from the start. So it gave me the framework maybe to see some things as an outsider from the get-go. But we're talking decades and decades of still part of the community up until 6 years ago when I finally physically removed myself. from attending, church. But I think the hardest part has been like the ramifications on other people. Like for me, it meant relief and freedom of thought and living values that are core to who I am. But the ramifications on family members and their thoughts about everything, and I'm constantly telling you their thoughts and concerns about the changes you're making, has been kind of a more complicated to navigate than just like, I'm out, like, relief. But it's just like continual redeciding every day, like it was the right decision, I'm staying where I am, like it was the right decision for me, even though everyone else is uncomfortable with it. But it took decades to get to that point where I was willing to make that decision.
I got the impression when you were telling us about everything that you just couldn't hold it inside anymore. You just were so uncomfortable with where, how you were living or what rules you were following. Did it kind of eat you up or make you uncomfortable?
Sure. Because on the one hand, it's like you're told you have to live and behave and, believe a certain way. And then to see, for me, those values actually not lining up with the decisions that people are making of how they're treating people who are different, or immigrants, or women, or who they're voting for. It's like they're the ones who were not following through on values that I had always been taught were central. So that disconnect was like too much for me. Like I just couldn't deal. I was like, we're not doing what Christ said to do. I can't. I'm out. Like that mental break for me was what pushed me over the edge. So I don't know if you would have a term for that, or if you've seen that before.
Oh yeah, well that's just the punishment sort of outweighing the rewards eventually, right? Mm-hmm. And you're acknowledging that. You talked about redeciding, and I think that's really powerful, because when we think about behavior change, there are some things you can do that you can never go back to. Literally, you just can't. But most of our behavior changes are changes that we could slip back into it. So if you quit smoking or you start an exercise program, you can go backwards. And so there is a sense of redeciding over time. And we need the supports for our behavior change in our environment. So we talk a lot about motivation, and that it's sort of within the individual and what makes someone strong to change. But what we don't realize is that our environment is a whole lot more powerful than our willpower. And so, for example, if you're losing weight, you don't want to have a jar of cookies, clear jar of cookies sitting on your counter, because every time you walk by it, you're going to see those cookies, right? And so setting up your environment to support your change is really important. And for humans, a lot of that is just the social support. And so I think one way to maintain our behavior change is to have people around us who are supportive and working with us towards our goals.
Well, I think Erin did a really good job of keeping close relationships even during and after her change. I mean, it hasn't been easy, but she and her family members have worked hard at it. What could you tell us about helping someone navigate these family situations, members that may not support their change? Or
Leslie, are you asking about how people who are in roles like you and I are in? We are, I'm going to just say, part of Erin's new community, if you don't mind me designating myself that. How do people who are sort of welcoming the changer person, the changing human being, how do we help them establish a new center of gravity where we are?
Well, I think that's important. That's not exactly what I was talking about, but I think that's important too, and I'd like Bonnie to speak to that. But also, I'm asking how the person who wants to change can encourage her family members to accept it or be willing to consider what they're doing and keep a relationship.
Or at least not be openly hostile about it.
How the original community can be part of the process as well, even as because they're going through a change that they didn't ask for. Like one of their own is sort of mutating in front of them, so they're also going through something that's hard.
Exactly.
I guess we probably have the easiest of all the jobs, Leslie.
We do.
We're just like, Erin, yay, come here. We love you so much. We think you're amazing. Like our jobs are probably the least fraught out of all the jobs.
Much easier.
Yeah, so let me take that first, what the new people can do. I think you have it exactly right. And then I would also say there's no formula. So ask Erin how you can support her.
Right.
Right? And she's probably going to say, I would guess, if we ask her, let's ask her in a minute. But you guys are already doing it. Just being here, being my friend, being supportive is what I need. What do you say, Erin?
I guess that, but also the fact that they were just so open about who they are, it kind of gave me the ability to say, well, this is kind of where I'm from, or like how I was raised to think. But hearing you talk about your experiences growing up kind of helps me put some different pieces together, or see things a little bit differently, which was helpful. So I guess encouragement, but also showing who you are as a way to, go both ways. Open communication.
That's great. And then let's talk about the previous community. So the bad news is that you can't always get them to be supportive. And there are absolutely people you need to not have in your life if you're going to make a big change. And if people are going to be supportive, I think what it takes is sitting down and listening to each other. And you only have control over one half of that. You can listen. You can listen to them about what their fears are for you. But they also need to be willing to listen to you. And I think when people can sit down and genuinely listen and seek to understand the other person, that's when they might be able to come to some kind of agreement about how this new relationship can be.
Different, but still there.
And respectful.
Right.
And Bonnie, just on the way over, we were talking about ingredients for change. And it seemed to me like where you were really landing was, if you want to be a change agent in the world, your job is to listen.
That's exactly right.
Oh gosh. That's hard. It's so much easier to say, you should be doing this.
Mm-hmm. But how many times have you changed because someone said, you're bad, something's wrong with you? No.
No. Zero. Negative.
Right.
No.
Because we put up a wall and we don't listen.
Right.
And it's, we're all human. We are more similar than we are different. And if we just sit down and listen to each other and try to resolve those differences and are respectful of each other, we can probably do that. Not every human has the capacity to do that.
Right. Right.
I will say that rings true for when I first started the road that I'm on. Kind of in a lot of ways coming out real hot out of the gate. Trump is the devil. Trump is the worst thing that has ever happened to and just being very angry. And that coming across to my family members and then being whoa, Erin, dial it back a little bit. But now we're more able to, and they've seen 10 years of him being said horrible person, so that also helps. But I would say if I'd not come on so angry and so strong in the beginning, it might have helped the conversations a little bit earlier on, whereas then I had to gain ground back before it could be a better exchange.
That makes sense. And one of the things I want you to remember, Erin, is that there are stages of change, and it's not unusual for us to be very strident when we are newly converted to something, or deconverted, as the case may be. And so it's just a stage, right? And I would hope that mature people could realize that.
You mentioned sometimes there are people in your life when you're making a change that are not it's not healthy to keep them in your life. And I'm thinking of an example of if a person transitions to another gender and one of their family members just will not accept it and harasses them. That seems to me a perfect example of this person is toxic. You cannot be around this person.
I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, so that's gonna.
And I would hope in that circumstance, perhaps there would be another family member who's more supportive, who could talk to that toxic person, because I wouldn't want to expose the transgender person to that toxic person to have those discussions, because you're going through enough, right?
Right.
When you are maybe trying to make the case for therapy with people who don't have exposure to it, like community I grew up with, very, very, very resistant to getting therapy. It seems like there's something wrong with you. There's some kind of a spiritual failing on your part that you would need to go talk to a therapist. So if you can't deal with it with prayer and with these other things, like, you just need to keep working on it. I loathe that mentality because of the unbelievable damage I've seen it do to people. And but it took me a very, very long time to go get therapy, and the only thing that pushed me over the edge was the damage I was doing to my own partner. Seeing the pain that I was causing him was what pushed me into, okay, this is not good. Like, I'm hurting myself and him. So, like, is there any really effective way that you've seen to, like, get through to people who are resistant to therapy?
There are definitely some people who are just never going to go to therapy. But I always tell people, when they're considering any kind of change, to think about, instead of thinking about it as something you're going to do forever. So a lot of people, for example, are resistant to taking antidepressant medication, even when they're very depressed. And I say, well, look, you've never taken this medication, so you don't know how you're going to react to it. And if you take the medication and you feel terrible, or there's no change, then obviously that's not going to work for you. Now, sometimes we have to change medications and change doses. But I say, what if you go on a medication, you find something that works for you, you stay on it for 6 months, then you know what it's like to be on an antidepressant that works, and then you can make an informed decision about whether that was good or not. Now, I'm not sure that would work about therapy with people who are really resistant to therapy. If they think, I don't know, something's really wrong with you if you go to therapy, you may not be able to change that. But I think that idea of, well, why don't you try it, can work really well. And think how it could work with lots of things. You know, why don't you try an exercise program for 3 weeks? If you're thinking about, you know, maybe you want to exercise, but you're not really sure, you don't know how you'll feel. Instead of trying to make a decision about whether you're going to exercise or not, figure out what your life is like when you're exercising. Because if you go to the gym and you don't, you know, you don't see your shape change immediately, but you are sleeping better and your energy is better, then you say, wow, why didn't I do this before? Right?
Exactly.
Almost like a lowering the stakes a little bit in their mind. Like, it doesn't have to be forever. It doesn't have to be the end of the world if you don't like it.
And maybe I'll pay for the first session, why don't we go together, might be a really good way to get them to go.
So, like a theme I'm hearing is just try and hold things a little bit more lightly. Like the whole, like, coming in hot doesn't necessarily help, or I'm going to do this forever doesn't necessarily help, or just butting heads with someone who is completely resistant doesn't necessarily help. Just like hold things a little bit more lightly if you can. The if you can does does catch me sometimes because as as a human being, I'll just say that's my baseline. Sometimes I'm really angry, and sometimes I'm really angry at people who do not want to change. Like, they don't want to change, but I want them to change. And as a general rule, my reasons for that mostly aren't, I want you to change so that you're nicer to me or give me more money or tell me I'm more awesome. Like, usually it's not, I want to benefit directly from a change I desire for them. It's usually more, I would like for them to do less harm in the world. And then I'm mad that that's not the case. Okay, so how do I deal with the mad so I'm not coming in hot and being counterproductive from the get-go, Bonnie?
Well, I would ask you, if you were telling me this, for example, in a therapy session, I would say, well, what do you want? Do you want to be effective, or do you want to release that anger onto these people?
Oh, it has turned out through experience that just yelling at somebody, for one thing, it like literally it makes no difference, right? Like, they just brick wall you. It just makes no difference. Or they might really genuinely lack the receptor to get to receive the message that you are sending. Like, it might just simply not be there. So it doesn't matter how loud you are. It doesn't matter how eloquent or relational or funny. Like, it doesn't matter if the receptor doesn't exist in the other person. And so the just catharsis of it is of no use to me as far as I can tell. But I don't is effectiveness one of the options then? You gave me the option of catharsis versus effectiveness. I would like to hear more about that.
You need the catharsis. So, not to minimize that at all, but you don't need to project it onto other people. So talk to like-minded people to get your anger out, do some journaling to get anger out. It's not going to be effective at changing other people. And sometimes in our minds, we conflate getting angry with someone with, well, we're going to get them to change. But it doesn't ever work. And so if you're going to actually ask people to change, it means you have to listen to them. You have to listen carefully. You have to empathize with what you can empathize with. And, one of the big problems we have in today's environment is that there's so much misinformation. One of the things I'm always reminding myself when I'm angry at people who voted for this dismantling of our federal government is that they have different information than I have. So I try not to hate them as much, but to realize that they are acting on the information that they have and doing the best they can with that information.
Do you send them the correct information? That's what I want to do. Here, look at this. Send it by email. Here, look at this.
Would you look at the information if somebody on the other side sent you an article? How likely are you to actually read that and consider it carefully?
Not very.
Yeah. So the answer is the same for them because they think you're a crazy liberal who has all the wrong sources. So as tempting as it is to think information can change people's minds, it does not change people's minds.
Well, the thing about information, I think that is the myth that it's going to do something so seductive because the implication is I'm going to drop this knowledge bomb and that's going to change this person. And you know what's really exciting about that concept? It's not like the vindication or the control or whatever. It's the fastness. Like it's like, ooh, no, we can get this sorted out today because I've got the info and we're going to it's fine. By dinner time, you're going to be different because you'll have the information. And that's so, it's a lot to give up this dream of maybe we can just fix it because it seems to me that so often people who have different information, like you were saying, they might have different information partly because they are more interested in picking up some other information. And that's a much deeper issue than the than the info. That's like an orientation, that's an openness, that's a what's magnetic to them. And until that orientation changes, only certain information will stick anyway. And the process of connecting with someone and maybe in training with their magnetic field to shift it a little so that other kinds of information are of interest, that's a long, involved process with a lot of like sitting and listening, and we're right back to listening. Mm-hmm. And that's a big ask. But what I hear you saying is, too bad.
Yeah. Do you want to be effective? If you want to be effective, and I'm not going and sitting down with people who support this administration and having long conversations with them. I'm finding that they don't want to have the conversation. And so how can we be effective in that way? I don't know. I wish I knew. There are some programs where they're getting people on opposite sides of the aisle to sit down together and converse with each other and get to know each other. And I do think that could be really helpful. But the people who are going to engage in that are rare.
Right. And that's what I kept saying about Erin. Other people from her community had been exposed at grad school to different ideas or in the supermarket at the newspapers. But she happened to be open to new ideas. Mm-hmm. And so I guess
in my practice, I work a lot with people who are actually leaving evangelical and other high control religions. And it's interesting because so many of them who come out of that tend to be pretty intelligent, and they tend to be critical thinkers from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And so they talk about how when they were 4, they asked the question like, mm-hmm. Well, what if somebody had never heard of Christianity? Would they still go to hell? And they hear the answer, yeah, sorry. And they say, well, that doesn't seem right. And that those kinds of things build up over time. There's also, though we have the capacity to suppress those things. So I think probably all of us have had some issue in our lives where we didn't want to hear the information. Mm-hmm. And so when you hear it, you sort of suppress it. Nope, not going to look at that, not going to pay attention to that. And we can do that for a long time. Push away the information that's inconsistent. And we have something called confirmation bias. It's just a bias in how we think. And the ideas that are consistent with what we already believe tend to stick, just as Shay was saying. And the ones that are inconsistent with that, we say, well, that doesn't make any sense. I'm going to brush that one away.
And most of us have some level of that going on.
We all have that.
Yeah.
We are all human and we all have biases.
Yeah. And
I think one of the signs of critical thinking is being able to understand your own biases. And sometimes it's professional training that helps. If you're trained as a scientist, for example, you have years and years of training in, okay, here's this hypothesis. We are going to test this and find out if we're right. And you might be really disappointed by the results, but you're not going to deny them, at least in your professional life, right?
But it's really hard even in the professional life. So I am a scientist, and I can say that in grad school, you learn a bunch of stuff, you learn a bunch of techniques, you learn a bunch of information, blah, blah, blah. The thing that I actually learned in grad school that mattered was that you have your hypothesis and you're doing your experiments and you want the data to come back to support your hypothesis so that you can take that data to your boss and they can say, yay, you can write a paper, mm-hmm. and then you can write a paper and then you can graduate. Yay, that's what we want. So when data comes back as confirming, that's awesome. That's a good day. And if data comes back, this experiment just didn't work, like something about this is not interpretable, you just have to do it over, that's kind of a annoying day. And then if data comes back and says, just no, your hypothesis is wrong, it's wrong, you have to start over, that's like a bad crushing day, and you go home and you like cry into your pillow. And what I learned in grad school, like just through experience, is if you get data back that says, yes, your hypothesis is correct, then that is fine. That's a fine day. And if that comes back This can't be interpreted. This is just sort of junk for today. Well, that's, whatever. And if the data comes back, your hypothesis is absolutely, completely wrong, unequivocally, that is a fantastic day. Like, that's the day where you go, oh, here's where things start. This is the day I've been waiting for. Now I get to learn something that I didn't even know enough about to ask a question about. Let's do this. But you have to rewire emotionally to go from your goal being success and affirmation and I get a pat on the back and I get my publication cookie. You have to rewire deep down in your emotions to what, okay, now I actually care about something else. And when I get a signal from that something else, now I'm in. Let's do this. And it's that's that sort of thing it's really hard to learn. It's because you feel like you are you're not doing the thing you've been sort of groomed to do by the culture from day one, which is, rack up those successes. Off you go up the ladder, to be really interested in something that is unknown and new and wiggly, and you're like, oh, what is that? I don't even know what it is. And I have no way to know whether it's going to rack me up a bunch of successes. It might not. But now I'm interested. It's hard.
Yeah, what you're describing is what I used to interpret as a threat. Like, if it was something I didn't expect, it must be dangerous. Threat must put up the defense moves. Whereas you're just saying it's just something you weren't aware of.
Yeah.
And that's interesting.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah,
to not be afraid of it.
Yeah.
How do you...
Or to actually be like, I wish that this weren't true because it's in my way. To go from, to, oh. That's an emotional change. That's not even a cognitive change.
It's interesting because it makes me think about curiosity as a sort of personality factor that might affect how much we're able to change.
Right.
And in certain high control religious environments, one of the things that happens is your information gets really restricted. You can only watch these particular shows and you can only listen to these particular things and you can only be around these particular people. And if you have a question, the question is squashed, right? So if you ask the question, well, what about the person who's never heard of God? And someone says, don't ask questions, the book has the answer. And you squash that curiosity and squash it and squash it and squash it. It probably gets harder and harder to get out.
Donnie knows my life.
Yeah, some of that was verbatim from last time.
So, Bonnie, tell us, based on your experience with all your clients who are going through changes, what would you say to someone who's listening to this podcast and they are starting to think, this isn't working for me? Can you give some, I know that's a broad question.
No, I think that's a perfectly good question. One thing is allow yourself to think. Don't start squashing it. And if what you have to do is, write it down in a journal and keep it really safe so nobody around you finds it, it's password protected, and you explore those ideas, that's really powerful. If you have anyone who is outside your evangelical subculture that you can talk to about it, I think that would be great too. Someone who's safe to say, I'm having some doubts. Can you help me understand? How do other people think about this? How do you think about this? That would be tremendous. There are groups of secular humanists, for example, all over the country, and they're full of people who have come out of religion, and especially high control religions. And so finding a local secular humanist group in your area might be helpful, because those are people who've been through what you've been through. And I think the other thing is, if you're open to therapy, finding a good therapist, and there's a project called the Secular Therapy Project. And those therapists in the Secular Therapy Project are secular people. Some of them have been always non-religious. Other people have come out of religion. And so that sort of therapist might be particularly helpful for someone who's exiting a high control religion.
And what if you know someone who is, I guess what I'm going to sort of put this in like a shape. If there's a center of culture, and you know someone who's kind of at the edge of it, and that's still kind of how they frame things. That's kind of like emotional home base, and that feels like home for them. But they're not completely locked down, and maybe just say something where you go, there's like an opening there. You're not sure about that piece.
I think that's a great idea as long as you think it's safe. In those high control religious environments, there are always other people who are doubting, and it might look like everybody else is 100% all in because on the outside, that's what they're showing because that's what the environment demands. But there are people having doubts.
I'm thinking about kids who want to come out as gay. And it used to be that I would imagine you might suggest to someone to, if they're talking to you, that's great. But if they're not seeing you, if just a friend you're talking to find a teacher or something. But these days, Bonnie, are there any teachers who are they're held in such tight restraints.
They're policed.
Yeah. So where does a kid go?
Right now, I think that there are teachers who are going to resist, teachers who are going to say, I'm not going to out a kid, despite the fact that in South Carolina, our law says that you can't call a child by their, any other name than the name on their birth certificate. Or if you do, you have to notify their parents. There are still safe people. And so look for the safe people. Could be a school counselor, could be a teacher, could be friends, could be the local, in South Carolina, I think they call them typically spectrum clubs or LGBTQ alliance clubs. I think in general, I would just say, if you want to make a change, find people who are farther along in the journey than you are and talk to those people.
Right. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking also maybe a friend's parent.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Someone they feel like they can trust.
Absolutely.
Or maybe a friend who is further along in being out as gay, their parent, because they know.
I hope there are a lot fewer students now who are really afraid to come out. I know there are many still, and their home environments are not accepting, but kids these days are very accepting. To them, it is just not a thing. And so I think finding support with your peers is often a really good idea.
Okay, good.
And for other people who might be on the, who could be that safe person, I would encourage them, make yourself known. Make it crystal clear. Even if you think no one's even listening, but somebody's listening, I guarantee you.
Absolutely.
And I found safe people for me because they made themselves crystal clear that I can trust them. Mm-hmm. So I'm fixing. Okay.
You have lived in the South for a while.
Yeah. Oh man, that was scary. I'm trying to prepare myself to be intentional about that for my own family and nieces and nephews that are real young, growing up the same way that I was brought up, and I want to be crystal clear to them, regardless of if there might be ramifications for me going back to living close to family who are still very much in the high control. It'll be clear to those kids that they can come to me if they need to. So
that's great.
And Erin, when you say that you saw that there were people around who were safe, do you mean that you observed them behaving in ways that signaled to you that they were good people to talk to, or that they said, very clearly, "Hey, Erin, come talk to me. I'm okay," or some of both?
Both. I would say through their behavior, the way that they treated me, was my first signal. And then once they figured out that I was trusting them more, then they made it clear, like, if you ever need to talk, you can come talk to me. So it wasn't like the first time I met them, Aaron, if you need to talk to me, I would have been like, warning, you know? But it was through treating me with kindness and love, even though they saw I was struggling, and that was the signal to me.
Keeps coming back to go lightly, go slowly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bonnie, my last question would be, if you've been doing this for 30 years, you said, was there a particular, like, obviously not sharing a name or anything, but a particular, like, patient that really surprised you, like they were stuck for a very long time, and then all of a sudden, like, surprised you with a big, like, change?
No.
Okay. So
No sudden moves.
No sudden moves.
surprising.
Change is slow.
Okay.
Well, I think we need to wrap up, and I think that's something very important to leave with, is that people shouldn't expect, themselves to change quickly or to be extra brave, to just take one tiny step at a time.
Make very small changes. It's much better for the change sticking if you make really small changes and be very committed to those small changes. And when you've got that under your belt, then you make the change a little bit bigger and a little bit broader.
And that boosts your confidence, maybe, or your comfort level.
Absolutely, your comfort level, your ability to get over inertia. Inertia is really hard, right? And so if you make things small and doable and fun, then you can do them. So, you need to try to make the change as enjoyable as possible, and that's not always possible. But I think, for example, leaving a high control religion, being around people that you enjoy who are outside of that environment is really powerful.
Well, Bonnie, we really appreciate you being here. This has been great.
Thank you.
You've given us a lot of things to think about, and hopefully our audience will really benefit from this. I want to say your name again, Bonnie Cleveland. She works here in Charleston, and I'd like to leave with two thoughts, and the rest of you feel free to leave with your thoughts. My first thought is, if you're listening and you've made a big change, or you're in the middle of making a change and you want to reach out, our email address is changeishardyall, YALL, without the apostrophe, @gmail.com. And my second thought is, Bonnie was saying that if you want catharsis, don't be yelling at the person that you want to see change. Do it differently. My suggestion would be to go to either one of those axe throwing places, or the place where you can beat a car to death, or throw plates. There are places like that in
You
Charleston.
surprised me with that one, Leslie. You got me. You surprised me.
I think we should all go to one of those. I've been dying to go to one of those places. I have broken a few things in my own house, but I don't want to keep breaking my stuff. So, anyone have any ending thoughts?
Just thanks for coming. We kind of thought of you right away. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, just thank you for the work you're doing,
Exactly.
and thank you. Just keep doing it. Thank you.
We appreciate it. Bye, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.
Your